Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to another episode of New Music Finds. So this is where I like to collect together all the different albums that I've purchased over the past week and present it to you, give you a little bit of feedback on it. I get them from different places like my local record store, but also online retail like Amazon, eBay, and more. So I get a bunch of different things here. I've got 20 different albums I'm going to run through with you, and we'll get into that here in just a bit. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like. All those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, if you turn on notifications, you're going to stay up to date on really cool episodes just like this with New Music Finds. So we're going to run through a cross section of stuff here, but I always like to start off with new releases first, and then I get into all the other stuff, the sort of catalog albums and things that I find, the random good finds and stuff like that. And I got a couple really cool things in here to share with you. But first up, the reason I'm wearing this very cool Steve Miller shirt here, by the way, if you dig this shirt, it's courtesy of Societies. They're a great t-shirt company. I've talked to you guys about them before. I'll leave a link in the description for them. But they're one of my favorite places to get shirts, and I'm wearing it because Steve Miller put out J50, The Evolution of the Joker. Now, this actually came out a week earlier on the 15th, and I didn't buy it right away. This is rare for me to actually hold back on an album, but I wanted to wait until I heard the album because it does, as it says, it's the evolution of the songs. So there's multiple songs in a row, same song, where you hear, a live version, then an acoustic or a demo, and then it gets into the rock version, and eventually you hear the album. So sometimes 2, 3, and even 4 takes on a song on here. But I have to say that each of the versions on here were different enough that it actually was really interesting listening to the thing, and I didn't feel like I was hearing the same song over and over on it when it was done. You might have heard a live take on it that sounded one way, then you heard an acoustic demo, solo demo that was done by Steve. Then you heard a different in the studio demo with the full band before finally hearing the one on the album. And it was actually great because I found myself wanting to hear the album version of it to see how it all turned out in the end. So in the end of the day, I ended up really enjoying it. I first streamed the album and enjoyed it and said, you know what, I think I'm going to pick it up. And I bought it and I listened to it and I enjoyed it just as much when I actually got it. So you might reconsider if you were on the fence about this. I have to say it was a very cool listen. It's a 2 CD set, and it's a nice way to get all the bonus material without having to rebuy, albums over and over and over kind of a thing. So even though you are getting the album songs on here, the way that it's put together is done very well. And I even think the commentary on it didn't break the flow of the album, so it was very nice. All right, picked up a brand new Electric Boys album, guys from back in the late 80s, early 90s. I think they're a Swedish group. Could be wrong. Hopefully I'm not getting that wrong. Grand Explosions. Connie Bloom, frontman, still with the group, had a stint in Hanoi Rocks. Some of you guys might know him from that. I knew him from the Electric Boys. The guy's done all kinds of different things. He's had some solo albums and things like that, but just good, straight up rock and roll going back from the day. If you're a fan of glam metal like me, Electric Boys were one of the greats, and they're still doing it today. So there's that album. Here's another one, another glam metal band making a return here, the band Hurricane. And this one here called Reconnected, and it has been out, I guess, for a while because I know that it was due out a few weeks back. I was waiting on it through Amazon. Amazon still says it's not coming out until the 29th, so it's only on pre-order for them. But I walked into my local record store, Sound Exchange, there it was on the wall, so of course I went ahead and bought it and canceled my order with Amazon. I will say this, you've got 2 original members in here. You've got the bass player and the guitar player in here. Very cool, doing a great job. I love the music on it. Even the new vocalist in here sounds great. But after track 1, track 2, very good stuff. They do a cover of the Queen song Under Pressure, and for me, it just kills it. It's a great cover, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't sound like the rest of the album and what Hurricane normally sounded like. And I'm not really sure why they did it or why it's track number 3 on here. It should have been later in the album maybe. but to cover such a well-known song on your own album where you've got lesser known songs, not sure. Great album though, I just don't like that one cover on it, but that's me. I don't really like when bands cover really well-known songs and they pretty much do the same version of it, not doing anything to make it their own. Okay, the album that turned out to be the biggest surprise, we're moving on now to September 22nd release week, and Paul Rodgers' Midnight Rose, absolutely fantastic 6 studio album. This thing, so good. I did a full review of this. I highly recommend checking it out if you've got questions about this album. But if you like Bad Company, if you want any of that original classic sounding stuff, this album hits the nail on the head. And for being 73 years old, he still sounds absolutely amazing. All right, another guy returning here, Andy Taylor of Duran Duran, putting out his 4th solo album. Yes, it is 4. There is an unreleased, I think it was the 2nd album was unreleased, and it did eventually get a release through fan club only, but this in fact is his 4th solo album. I know a few people were confused by that when I mentioned it early on. Called Man's a Wolf to Man. Pretty much what you'd expect from him. It's good. It's not quite as rockin' as the debut album that he did, Thunder, but it does fall in line with the other stuff. And it's, I would even say, a little more akin to modern day Duran Duran than some of his solo stuff. But it is a good album. I was pleasantly surprised by it. And we've got classic rockers Firefall and this album here called Friends and Family. And they're doing cover songs on here, but they're all songs that various guys in Firefall had a hand in, either as a session musician or in some other way. So I thought it was kind of an interesting, cool way to put together a covers album. So it's not outright just selecting songs at random or the biggest songs or things like that, but actually doing something that the members of this group have a hand in. And so very cool stuff that's on here. They're doing Doobie Brothers, Heart, Marshall Tucker Band, Poco, Leonard Skinner, Byrds, Fleetwood Mac. So a lot of great stuff on there. All right, those are the new releases that I picked up, and then I move now into stuff I picked up from my local record store, got from eBay, things like that. This actually is a newer release as well. Last week, a reissue of the 2nd album from Headcat, the supergroup that featured Lemmy from Motorhead on bass and vocals, guys from Stray Cats and rockabilly guy Denny Harvey in there as well. Live album, live in Berlin. I probably really should have talked about it with other new releases because it did come out last week, but my mindset was based on where I bought it from, which was Sound Exchange, my local record store. Live album featuring 21 tracks. This was recorded in 2011, so it's the last thing that they did before Lemmy's passing. Features songs that they did both on the debut album as well as their 2nd album, but also some other rockers that just never made the cut. So I found it to be really good. It's a great live recording, and you guys know I'm not a big fan of live recordings. If I'm saying it's a good live recording, good quality, then you know it's gotta be. Now, I had forgotten about this. This came out in 2020, but the band Headcat continued on even after the passing of Lemmy. So they changed the name or modified the name to Headcat 13, and we still get Danny B. Harvey on here, who is the guitar player for the group. Slim Jim Phantom, the drummer from Stray Cats, is not part of this lineup, and of course Lemmy passed away. So filling in for Lemmy is Alan Davey from Hawkwind. So Lemmy from Hawkwind, now you got another bass player from Hawkwind coming in. Both Danny and Alan are singing on this. It's great. And let me just see real quickly where it tells me Paul Vazilis is on drums. I'm not familiar with his name. You also get Anne Marie Lewis, who is, I think, the daughter of Jerry Lee Lewis, doing the song Whole Lot of Shaking Going On, which, of course, he made famous. So she's on here in a capacity as well. But just a lot of great rockabilly tunes. We get both originals and classic cover songs. And I definitely was interested in this for the more original songs. The second Headcat album had 2 originals on it, so nice to see that here on Headcat 13 they're doing some originals as well. All right, so keeping in line with the Lemmy material, I went and picked up some Motorhead albums that I didn't have. They're technically their debut album, although it didn't come out till 79, On Parole. This was recorded in 76 with a different lineup. We've got Larry Wallace and Lucius Fox in the band. Phil Taylor does play on some of the tracks here. And so this is not quite the Motorhead that we know today, or at that time, when they became popular, were still going on. This is definitely much more 70s era sounding band, which is very cool in my opinion. But the 1977 re-recording of a lot of those songs that did have the famous lineup with Phil Taylor and Fast Eddie Clarke and Lemmy, which is just self-titled. I also picked that version up so I could do a nice comparison, because a lot of the tracks cross over between these 2 albums. But this one here, definitely starting to get that Motorhead sound. It's also got a lot better production than the album On Parole. But of course, wouldn't be until we get into Overkill and beyond that we really get that Motorhead sound. And I didn't realize that I was missing this one, Iron Fist, the follow-up album that came out after Ace of Spades. And I was sort of shocked by that. And of course, I had to pick that up. And this is a deluxe edition, one of these cool ebook things. So it's the hardcover book with a lot of cool photos and write-up and stuff like that in here. 2-disc set. You get the original album, and then you get a whole bunch of demos on here as well. 25 tracks on the first disc, 75 full minutes on that. And disc 2 is a live album that's got 19 tracks on it recorded at the time. So there you go. All right, another trip to Sound Exchange. I made a couple of them this past week. Got into Steve Miller because of that J50 album, and I picked up the 68 to 73 Best Of. I've got a bunch of these early albums. I'm missing a few, still trying to flesh out that collection. One of them that I did pick up was Recall the Beginning album. This one here, 1972. The album that came out right before J50. Of course, I wanted to check that out. Sorry, J50, right before The Joker. I wanted to check that out. What was he sounding like on the album right before? Of course, we know the album that came right after it, which was the more famous album with Fly Like an Eagle on it. But this one here, CD reissue of this added 4 bonus tracks on it, which the original one had 15. We've now got 19 tracks on this, and I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, I've been really getting into more of the early era Steve Miller. Of course, was always a fan of that later era 70s stuff that he became so popular on the Flies Like an Eagle and Book of Dreams album, which is my favorite of his. And of course, this is the much earlier stuff that goes up to 1973 with The Joker. So you do get those tracks on there, but then you go back into the more blues and psychedelic era that he started with in 68. And that's just fun having a collection of that. And of course, we've got the super 1974 to 78 Best Of that has sold something like 15 million copies. That one's out there too, which picks up right from this. So if you add those two, you pretty much have everything you need from him. Managed to get a hold of the last Bad Company album that I didn't own, Rough Diamonds. Last one with Paul Rodgers on it anyway, and 10 tracks on here. And this is a digitally remastered one, and what I didn't know is this is out of print. And I looked it up after picking it up. I got it brand new from Sound Exchange, but found out that this album is regularly going for like 40, 50 bucks because it's out of print, and I didn't know that. And to go to Sound Exchange and find a still sealed remastered copy of this, like it was no big deal. I just thought, oh, okay, they just can reorder another one of these in, but turns out they can't. Felt really good about that after I got home and I'm listening to it and realizing what a find that was. But that's not even the best find that I had this past week. Also at Sound Exchange, I found this, The Law, the unreleased second album. Now really these tracks that are on here are leftovers from the recording session for the Law album. But this here has 9 tracks on it, 8 of which didn't make the first album, and then the 9th one is a remix or a rough recording of one of the songs from the first album. It says rough mix on here. But this has on it, I forget which tune it is, but songs written by Joe Lynn Turner. And, you know, if you remember, The Law was a project that Paul Rodgers and Kenny Jones did, the Faces and Who drummer, as a super group. But they brought in all these outside writers, including Phil Collins from Def Leppard, and apparently other cool people did other songs for them, like Joe Lynn Turner. So this is just very cool, unreleased album. Of course, it's a bootleg. Great sound quality on it, though. Maybe one day we'll get lucky and those other tracks will get released. Okay, a few things off of eBay. Ordered Betsy, self-titled album. I think this is 1988. She comes from the band Bitch. And what I didn't know was it's actually the same guys from it, just deciding they wanted to go in a more pop metal sound, a more radio-friendly sound. And so they changed the name to Betsy instead of Bitch, becoming something that more people could stomach. Unfortunately, it didn't translate into sales for them. But if you're a fan of the first two Bitch albums, that's essentially what this is, just continuation under the name Betsy. So not so much a solo album as I originally thought, but cool nonetheless. Then we get Craig Goldie doing a solo album for Shrapnel Records called Insufficient Therapy. And what I didn't know when I bought this is that the bass player and vocalist on here is none other than Jeff Pilson from Dokken fame, being on here, of course, currently with Foreigner. And we've also got some other people on here, John Townsend. Well, actually, I was going to, correction here. Jeff Pilson just sings on it. John Townsend plays bass. And then we got drums by Aaron Wilson and keyboards are by David Reichman on here. But I totally was not expecting that when I opened this up and saw this. Now, I will say this about the recording. I'm a little bummed about it because, in my opinion, the recording is a pretty poor quality mix on it. It's kind of strange. It's almost like there's no bass and there's no drums in it. They're just so far to the back of this. The guitar is up front, but in kind of a very strange way. So it sounds very thin and there's just not a lot of punch to it. You do get the standard Craig Goldie sound made famous with Dio, but just not what I was expecting. There's far better recordings that he has done, and certainly the stuff that he's done with Dio sounds a heck of a lot better. But when you've got somebody like Jeff Pilson and Craig Goldie pairing up on an album, you would think this would have some amazing production. Just not the case on this one. I'd love to hear this album get a remix if ever possible. I was in a whole mood for Shrapnel related guitar shredding stuff, so I also picked up Tony McAlpine, Edge of Insanity debut album from 1985. This thing is so good. Of course, he would go on to do a studio project with his brother Al Howe, and so they called it Howe 2. They did 2 albums together, and then he returned to solo doing this album here called Freedom to Fly, another great album. I never really got into the later stuff that McAlpine did, but as a solo artist, but the early stuff like this is definitely in that shred fest style that I like. And then this I just bought simply based on the album cover and the fact that it's on Shrapnel Records, Stephen Ross, and this album here that is called Midnight Drive. Don't know really who he is or any of the other guys that play on this, but again, it is just great guitar shred stuff. I think this came out around 1990-91 era. I don't see the date on the back of this, but good stuff nonetheless. So a bunch of guitar shred, a bunch of great blues rock stuff, got some great metal with Motorhead in here, and just a bunch of other glam stuff thrown in on it. So 20 great albums, some very cool finds. Hopefully you saw some cool stuff within this. Maybe you want to go search out. Let me know the things that you picked up. What were your great finds from this past week? Let's share in that together. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.